Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Havoc here with an Adobe Photoshop tutorial. This will be the first episode of a mini basics series. If I don't cover something that you would like to know in this video, be sure to leave a comment down below. Let me know what it is, and hopefully I'll include it in my later episodes. I think this will be a 2 or 3 part series, and I can do other programs such as Illustrator or Premiere Pro. Just leave some suggestions down in the comments. This video will be divided into 5 different sections. The first one will be interface. I will explain file creation, layout, and controls in Photoshop, as well as shapes. The second will be effects. Then I will be going over images. In this, I will explain how to remove backgrounds, how to use the lasso, pen, and brush tools, as well as clipping masks. The fourth will be adjustment layers. I will bring in an image and blend it into a new background. And last but not least, I will go over fonts, how to find and download them, as well as basic effects to make your fonts look a little more professional. Let's dive straight into the first section of this tutorial, and that is the interface. We'll be going over file creation first. Now, there are 2 different ways to open up files. We can either open up an image or a previous Photoshop file, and the second way gives us a little more freedom. We can open up a blank canvas, we can change the size and the proportions, as well as other settings, and I'll be going over that shortly. But first, I want to go over the first option, and that is opening up an image. So we'll go over to File and click Open, and I have some images here in a folder on my desktop, and I'm just going to go ahead and open up one of them. You can change the file name, so if you don't like the file name that you already have, you can change it and just click open. And it pretty much just creates a canvas in the size and proportions of our original image. It's not an option I prefer. I prefer the second option. We go to File and click New, and we can change the name, so I'm just going to name it Tutorial. We can change the size of our blank canvas, so we can change the width as well as the height, and the format, so we can change pixels to inches and a lot of these different options. Now, I typically stick with pixels and inches, and it really depends on what your end products will be. If you're planning on printing out whatever you're making, I would stick with inches so it sticks with the proportions of paper size. If you're digitally uploading this to YouTube or a website, I would stick with pixels. And I'm just going to stick with 1920 by 1080. This is a typical format that I would make my YouTube thumbnails in. If you're digitalizing this, make sure you have the correct proportions. Now, moving along, let's go over to resolution. And in order to understand what pixels per inch really means, let's go ahead and zoom into this photograph. So each pixel are each of these little squares, and each of these little squares has a set color. It doesn't have a gradient. If we want an image to blend colors, blend a little easier, and have a higher resolution, we would want each of these squares to be smaller. So I typically find that 300 pixels per inch is perfect. I typically don't change the color mode, but I do change the bitrate to 16-bit. Pretty much changes your color range and how well colors blend in your image. 8-bit has 256 color ranges, 16-bit has 4,000, and 32-bit, I believe, has around 4 million. Now, the human eye can't detect the difference between 16-bit to 32-bit, but file size does double when you change it from 16-bit to 32-bit. So 16-bit all the way. Background contents, I usually keep it to white. You can change it based on your preference. I don't really change any of these other options, and you just click OK, and that will create your blank canvas. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly show you guys how to use the shape tool. As you can see, for most of these tools on this toolbar, they all have arrows. So if you click and hold on one of them, it will show an array of different options for that single tool. So if we go ahead and unclick while we're hovering over one of these options, it will change it to ellipse. So if we want to go ahead and click and hold, we can change it to an ellipse. Now, if we want to undo a certain action that we've done, we can go to Control-Alt-Z, and that will pretty much undo whatever we did before. We can go back to our toolbar, click and hold and change it to rectangle. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly just make a basic rectangle. I'm not going to worry about size, color, any of that first. And I want to go over some of the basic controls of Photoshop. If we want to zoom in and see this rectangle in a little more detail, we can hold the Alt button and just scroll in with our mouse. So I'm going to go ahead and create another rectangle, but this time I will go ahead and use the quick command for that tool, which is U, and that will basically select the rectangle tool. I'm also going to change the color of this rectangle, and I can do this by clicking on this square right down here, and we can basically change it to whatever shade of color we want. So we can change it to blue, we can change it to green, red, whatever we want. So I'm just going to go ahead and click red right here, click OK, and then just click and drag and create our second rectangle. And I'm going to go ahead and click on the move tool right here. So if we want to place our red rectangle below our black rectangle, we can just basically just click and drag this to where it is highlighted, as you can see right there, and just now it's below. We can also change other options on this layers panel. We can change the opacity. So if we're clicked on a red rectangle, we can actually change the opacity. So we can change it to 50. We can change it to 11 so that it's barely noticeable. But I'm just going to go ahead and change it back to 100. So if we wanted to edit the black rectangle but not affect the red one, we can go ahead and lock the red rectangle. But before we do that, we actually have to rasterize these layers, because for now we cannot edit a shape or an image before we rasterize that layer. How do you do that? You basically go to the layer, right click, and go to rasterize layer. So now we can edit this black rectangle, and we will do that as well just for this demonstration for the second rectangle. As I was saying before, we want to lock this red rectangle so that we don't affect it. We can click on that layer and click lock. So now whatever we do to this first black rectangle will not affect the red one. So I'm just going to quickly show you guys with an eraser tool, and I'm going to go ahead and erase part of the black rectangle. And as you can see, it's not affecting the red rectangle at all. If we go ahead and unlock this and do the same thing, as you can see, it affects both rectangles. It affects the red one as well as the black one. Now the hide function is pretty useful. So let's say we want to edit this corner of our red rectangle, but we don't want to affect the black one, as well as we can't really see what we're working with. We can actually hide this black rectangle by clicking that button right here. And let's say we want to go ahead and erase part of this red rectangle. So if we go ahead and erase part of it and then unhide this black rectangle, as you can see, it did not affect the black rectangle. So it's a very handy tool to use if you're trying to edit layers that are below everything else without having to change the order of those layers. And if I want to duplicate the red one, I can right click and just click duplicate layer, and that will create a duplicate of this, and we can just click and drag that duplicate over down to here. Let's say we can rotate it by going to edit, transform, and rotate, and we can actually change a lot of different things in this toolbar. We can change it to skew, so we can actually skew this. It's kind of 3D, I guess. So I'll just click the move tool and click apply, and we can go back to edit, transform, rotate, and we can either rotate it by just eyeballing, or what is a better option is actually typing it in. So let's say you want it at a 45-degree angle, you can type that in and click enter, and then just click the move tool, click apply. So there are two different ways that you can change your properties of whatever shape you've made. The first way that I will show you does not work with rasterized options, but the second one does, so bear with me. The first way obviously works with unrasterized objects, unrasterized shapes. So I'm going to go ahead and create a rectangle right here. And if we click right here, we can actually change it to a pre-selection of different options. So we can change it to light green. We can change it to whatever we really want that's pre-selected. If we want a little more options, we can click right here, and it'll bring up this handy window that has the entire rainbow, entire array of colors. So I'm just going to go ahead and make it blue. Let's say we want a little more freedom in terms of color. So we want a color gradient. So we can actually go back to fill and we can change it to gradient. So if we click on one of these, and obviously the black one will change what is black. So if we double click, we can change it to blue, let's say, and we can change the other one. We can actually also change the angle at which this gradient is, so we can change it to 45 or we can change it to 225 respectively and go opposite directions. We can also do that by just clicking this and it'll go into the opposite direction, if that makes sense. We can also change other options. So as you can see, the gradient goes in a linear fashion. We can change it to radial. We can change it to angle. There are a bunch of different options that you can choose. It's really up to your preference, but I'm going to stick with radial because I think that looks pretty cool. Okay, so moving along, let's go to stroke, and this pretty much is an outline of whatever shape you have. So if you click on solid color, it'll create a solid outline of whatever shape you have. And just like fill, you can change that from solid to gradient. But I'm just going to go ahead and do solid, switch it to yellow. You can change it to whatever color you want, as well as whatever personalized color you want as well. So if I want something a little more grayish, I could do that. And I can also change the size of this outline. So let's say I want it to be very thick, so 10 points. That's a very thick outline. I can also change the proportions of my rectangle. So I can change it to be a 2-to-1 ratio. So I can change it to be, let's say, 400 by 200. And it will change the size of my rectangle. Okay, so moving right along, I'm gonna go into the second section of this tutorial, and that is effects. The first thing I'm really gonna do is just go ahead and create a blank slate. So I'm just gonna go ahead and delete all the current shapes that I have right now. And I can do this by clicking on the first layer, holding the shift button, and then clicking on the bottom layer right here so that it selects everything in between as well. You just right click and delete layers. So we're all clean slate. I'm gonna go ahead and create a new rectangle. So I'll go ahead and do the quick command, which is U, and that selects the rectangle tool. And I'll just click and drag and just create a random rectangle. Go ahead and click on the move tool. And what we can do to implement all of these effects is we can go over to the layers panel, right click on our layer and click on blending options, and that will set up this window right here. Have a whole lot of different options that we can use. The first one, the top one, bevel and emboss. This pretty much, if we click on it, this pretty much shows us a 3D effect. And obviously it looks like there's a little drop shadow. So it looks like hypothetically there's a sun over here at angle 120, obviously. So we can change that to, let's say if we want it on the other side, we can change it to 60. So that sunlight is coming in through this way. We can also change a lot of different options. So we can change the style from inner bevel to outer bevel. So that kind of creates more like a drop shadow in a way. We can change a lot of different options. Emboss, I typically stick with inner bevel. We can also change the technique from smooth. So if we want something with a little more hard edges, I guess, we can change it to chisel hard and chisel soft. I'll stick with chisel soft. We can also change the depth, so how, I guess, different the colors are, how much in contrast. And you can change the size of the bevel, so we could make it really wide or really skinny. So I'm just gonna go ahead and make it pretty wide right there. So moving right along, I'm gonna go into the texture option right here. If we click on it, there are loads of different patterns or textures that we can include for our shapes. And there's actually a way to import some of your textures as well. There are a lot of different presets, so we can actually change it to, horizontal land. We can change it to this one or this one, let's say. And I kind of like this one right here. We can change the scale, so if we want it to be more fine, we can do that. Moving along, let's go to stroke. Now stroke is just an outline. We can change the size, so if we want it to be very fine, we can change it to 3, and we can change the color. We can either change it right here, or if we want a gradient, we can change that to gradient, And if we double click, and let's say we want to change the black area of our gradient, we can change that by double clicking. And let's say we want to change it to red, we can do that right there. And as you can see, it changes, and we can just go ahead and click OK. And let's say you want the red on the other side, you can click reverse and it'll reverse it. And we can also change that based on angle. So if we want it to be at a 90-degree angle, we can move this, or we can type it in. Definitely like to go over gradient overlay, because this is probably the most important tool that you can use. Now, I typically don't change the opacity, but if you want to, that's obviously an option. But I'm going to go ahead and click on the gradient right here. Let's say, for instance, we want to click on this striped one right here. It creates a pretty interesting color overlay. But let's say you want to create your own preset. You want to create your own gradient overlay that you can use in future projects. You can actually do that by clicking this new button, and we can actually change the name. So I can change it to green flag, for instance, and that tells me that it's green striped, whatever. We can go ahead and click new, and it creates it right here. So we can click back off of it and click onto it. There it is right there. And let's say we want it to be a little more interesting than just a gradient, just one color to the other. So what we can do is click anywhere to add a stop. So we have to do that below this bar right here. And if we click on it, if we double click on this color right here, we can change the color. So let's say we want to change it to blue. Click new, and we can slide this around. So let's say we want it to be a little more closer to white. We can do that and increase the black area right here. We can also change the transition, which are these little color midpoint scales right here. So if we want to create it to be a sudden transition from blue to white, we can do that. Go ahead and create an outer glow on this first rectangle that we have right here on the top. So I'm going to go ahead and click on outer glow. We can change the opacity, so we can change it to 100, but you really can't see it right now. And how to change that is we can change the spread and the size. Now the spread pretty much will change the width of the ultimate light, I guess, or glow. And the size will translate to how wide the transition is. So if we pretty much bring this spread to really low, probably about 8, and we change the size to pretty high, I typically find this to be pretty good. And I'm just going to click OK for now. So the important difference is outer glow is used on objects with a dark background, whereas drop shadow, if we go to blending options and change it to drop shadow, so I'm going to unclick outer glow and click drop shadow. Obviously you can't see the drop shadow in terms of black background. Alright, so let's get into the third topic of this tutorial, and that is images. I'll basically be going over the main topic, and that is how to remove backgrounds from images and pretty much how to use various tools to your disposal. Lasso, polygonal, magnetic, as well as the magic wand tool and the pen tool. And I'll also be going over clipping masks later on in this topic. First thing I'm really going to do is go ahead and load in an image. And to do that, I'm going to go up to File and Place. And we're going to start out very simple right now, and later on work our way into cutting out cars and placing them in different photos. So I'll be going over that later. But the first thing, I'm going to be loading in this Photoshop file. So I'm going to click on the Move tool right here and place our image. And we can always move it around if we're still on the Move tool. There's a white background on this photo, and I'm going to quickly show you guys that. So I'm going to go to the Rectangle tool, fill it with black, and then I'm just going to go ahead and create a rectangle. And obviously it goes over the Photoshop, so I'm going to click the Move tool again and move the rectangle below the logo. So my first task for now is to cut this Photoshop logo from this white background, and you actually find quite a few images on the internet with white backgrounds. Since we have straight lines and also a great variation in color between the background and what we're trying to cut, we're going to be using the magic wand tool. So if you click and hold on this tool right here and bring it down to the magic wand tool, and basically the magic wand tool is where Photoshop can detect the difference between the background and what you're trying to cut out. So obviously there's a clear distinction. So if I click anywhere on the white background, it will pretty much detect that area and I can delete it. But obviously first we have to rasterize this image. Just like any image, it will not let us delete it until it is rasterized. So I'm going to right click, rasterize layer, and then just press delete, and the background is gone. So what we can do to deselect from this selection is just Control D, and that selection goes away. And I want to quickly explain that the lasso tool and the polygonal lasso tool are pretty much not computer driven. You yourself create all the points, whereas the computer creates the points on the magic wand tool as well as the magnetic lasso tool. To start out, we want to make sure that whatever we're selecting is in view, because while you're using lasso tool, you cannot move around. So lasso tool, how it works is you create a point, so you click and you hold, and wherever you move your mouse is where your journey will basically go, where the path of your selection will go. Simply create a selection around this car. It is not a tool to use to create a selection that is very precise. Obviously, I could work on it a little longer. You want to make sure that you connect the start and the end point so that it creates a solid selection. Now, whatever the selection is what you will be deleting, just like the magic wand tool. So if I right click, I can select inverse. So if I wanted to delete all the background and just have the car, that's how I would do it. Now I also have to rasterize this image, obviously, to edit it. So once I rasterize it and press delete, it deletes everything and I just have a car. The lasso tool is very much different than the polygonal lasso tool. The polygonal lasso tool is all straight lines, as you can see from the icon right here. And it's also a tool where you don't hold on your mouse, you just click and create points. So I'm just going to go ahead and go around the car and remove the background. Okay, so I completed the selection, so I'm going to once again right click, select inverse, and I guess I have to rasterize it again because I undid that, and I just press delete. Now I think this is a whole lot cleaner. I did this very quickly too, so if I Control D to deselect it, that looks a whole lot cleaner. The pen tool is probably the best tool to use on this program for cutting out backgrounds. However, it is one of the most difficult tools to learn, so I will go ahead and teach you guys how to use it real quick. So the pen tool, how it works is you click and you create points. So let's say I try to cut out this P with the pen tool. This would be very easy, and it also will be very effective. So I click, I create a point, I click again, it creates a straight line, and I create another point right here, let's say. So obviously with our next point, we want to create a curve to outline this P shape. How do we do that? With the pen tool, we click and we hold, and as we hold, we can see this line up here. The longer the line we make, the sharper the curve will be, the more extreme the curve will be. The shorter the line, the more subtle, the more actually straight this curve will be. So you want to make sure your line is angled in a way that matches the outline. So I want to angle it like this so that it is matching the angle of the P. So we obviously have to end up stretching this line to create a more extreme curve, because when it's shorter distance, it's more straight. So if we move this line, create a little longer, it creates a better curve. I let go. Let's say we make a mistake. We can always go ahead and do Control-Alt-Z and go back. That's the really useful thing about this tool versus the other ones, is that you cannot go back on the other ones. You cannot undo, or else you undo all your progress. So I'm going to go ahead and create that point once again, hold, and make another outline. So let's say you're going from a curve back to a straight line. General rule of thumb, Whenever you're creating a point, you want to think about what comes after the point you're about to make. So obviously we want to create a straight line. So we want to create a straight point, if that makes sense. How do we create a straight point? We just click. We don't click and hold because that is for curved lines. So if I just create a point, if I just click, it creates a curve before the point. But after the point, it will be straight. So if I click again, it creates a straight line like so. Obviously, we want to connect the start and the bottom. And obviously, when we see that circle, that indicates that the points will be connected if we click. So we click, the points are selected. If we right click, make selection, and we can actually create a feather, so it would create a kind of a fade around our selection. And just to show you guys what that is, if I just go ahead and type 5 pixels, click OK, it creates the selection. And let's say I want to delete everything on the outside. I don't want to delete the P. I can actually invert the selection, Control-Shift-I. Now that I've done that, it will select everything on the outside, as you can see, and we can go ahead and press delete, and it deletes everything. We can still see the black background very faintly, but it does transition that. So I'm going to go ahead and do Control-Alt-Z to go back. I'll right click, make selection, put it at 0, click OK, Control-Shift-I to select inverse and press delete. And as you can see, it doesn't create that transition. All right, so now that I got that outline, I'm gonna go ahead and right click, make selection, 0 feather, and Control-Shift-I to create our selection. Make sure this image is rasterized, so right click, rasterize, and press delete. So now that we have a solid car, obviously you can't see it right now, but this is an overlay over our original image. So I'm going to go ahead and Control-D to deselect, and we can actually move it with the move tool. So we have another car right here, but let's say we want to move it, let's say farther back, honestly. And also we can see there's a little sliver of this image still here. So I can just quickly use the polygonal lasso tool and just outline that and just delete it. And press Control-D to deselect. Make sure that car is selected. Go to Edit, Transform, and Flip Horizontal so that it is facing the other way. And I'm also going to scale this down. So I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and Scale. And it will create this box. If I hover over this corner button right here and I click and hold and move it, it will scale this car down. Obviously, when you do not hold the shift button, it does not keep the proportions. So holding the shift button, it keeps the proportions, and we can scale it down to, let's say, there, and press apply. How to do clipping masks? It's very simple. A lot of people try to make it more stressful than it really needs to be. But what we do is we make a selection just like we've done before. So I'm going to use the pen tool to outline this P, for example. Right click, make selection, and click OK. Now, when this is highlighted, instead of pressing delete, what we're going to do is go down to the layer panel right here and press on this add layer mask button right here. Now that we've done that, that is creating a mask, and it is preventing us from editing anything outside of this P. And we can see this because it creates this layer type adjustment that is associated with your Photoshop layer. If we go to our layer and select the brush tool and select it right here, we'll still affect inside here. But if we go outside, oh, whoa, look at that. We cannot affect anything outside of this layer's mask. If we make sure that we're selected on our brush tool and we're selected on our layer mask right here, we are pretty much creating a clipping mask. So I can create a clipping mask and pretty much edit this area out so that you are pretty much not able to edit inside this area. And I can always change the size a little lower to create this corner right here. But let's say, hypothetically, we wanted to bring back maybe the S that we deleted, or maybe we want to bring something else back. We can go to our eraser tool, switch it to maybe a little less, switch the hardness all the way. Now, I obviously also want to make sure we're all the way up to 100 opacity so that we're bringing back the entirety of the photo. But wherever I click, I pretty much delete that clipping mask. Let me go to our brush tool and go to our actual layer, the Photoshop layer, so that we can actually edit it. Make sure we're on red right here. Now when I click on it and switch the color, we cannot obviously change inside the P, but we can actually change inside the S now. And just to simply show you guys how this works, I'm gonna up the size all the way up to 135, and obviously we can edit whatever we want inside that area. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring in our clipping mask closer to the sun so that we have an idea. We'll be adding highlights over here where the sun is directly hitting the car and shadows where it is not. Make sure we're on black, let's say, to create shadows, and we'll obviously want to lower our opacity down to maybe 24, something a little less, and lower our size down to 6, and lower our hardness like so. So I would probably go ahead and make this entire bottom darker than the rest. So I would go below this, pretty much this angle of this car. Go ahead and shadow in everything right here. And you can be more precise if you really want to be, I guess. I'm just doing it really quickly just to show you guys how to do this. So that's darker right there. We can actually click on this double arrow button to switch these colors so that the white is on top. So now we're using white to create highlights, and we'll create highlights on the very edge. So I'm gonna actually want to kind of pretty much hover right between on the car and outside of the car to create a highlight. And we can also just size this a little higher. Sometimes a bigger highlight will look a little more realistic, but pretty much edit it to however you want. So if I move that down, that definitely does look a lot different than our original car, I would say. When we bring this into this photograph, it looks odd because it's all foggy. There's no presence of sun in this image. So our objective is to pretty much make this car fit in with the background. Once again, add a layer, put it below the car, go to the paintbrush tool, and it's at 29 hardness. So I'll just go ahead and do this real quick. 24 opacity. So I can click on this double arrow right here, get it to black, and then we can just go ahead and start shading in a little shadow right here. And once again, keep adding different layers. Okay, so to start out, I'm gonna go ahead and go to our layers panel down here and click on the circle right in the middle. And it shows us an array of different adjustments that we can apply to our project. I will be going over some of these. There are quite a few. I can go into more depth and go over some of these other ones in the second episode. If you guys want me to do that, let me know down in the comments. But to start out, I'm gonna go to color lookup, and it'll basically load up a new layer right here. And obviously nothing really changed. To change this and to actually look up some different adjustments, we can go up to the top right here where it says load 3D and load in this drop down, and we have an array of different choices. We could do, let's say, crisp warm. We could do foggy night. That looks pretty dope with the foggy background right here. Or we could perhaps do Horror Blue. We have our adjustment layer, it's at the very top, so it's affecting all of the layers below it. But we could obviously move it below the car, and it affects everything but this car. We could even move it all the way down, and it doesn't affect anything. So this is how you could essentially affect different parts of your image. But how do you affect a single image? How can I apply a certain adjustment layer, let's say, to only this car? You want to put that adjustment layer above whatever image you want to impact. So if I wanted to impact that car, I would make sure to move this adjustment layer all the way up to the top, right above the car. And I want to hover in right in between the adjustment layer and the car layer. And I want to hold the Alt button. And when we hold the Alt button, you will see a square show up with an arrow. And that means it's going to apply to the layer below it. So if I click, it only applies to the car. So now it is linked to that car. Okay, so the next image adjustment I want to show you guys is hue and saturation. And this is a good tool to use to really edit your images to the full extent. What we can do is we can actually switch the hue, saturation, and lightness. Now saturation, put it all the way down, your images will just be black and white. Or if you put it all the way up, all the colors will be very vibrant. And so you want to find that middle ground. I typically like to have it just a little higher. And we can also change the hue, and this will change the color of our car. So I can actually change this car to possibly yellow. Okay, so now I'm going to make sure I'm selected on our background right here, and I want to blur this background. So I'm going to go to Filter, Blur. There are a lot of different blurs that we could possibly use, but I'm going to go ahead and use Gaussian blur right here. And obviously that's blurred a little too much, so you want to kind of play around with it, see what you really want. But I kind of like something around there. And we pretty much have our focus on the car now. We can add a little bit of a blur on this car. Not as much as the background, but this looks a little off, if I do say so myself. So I'm going to do blur, and this time I'm actually going to do motion blur so that this car actually looks like it is moving a tiny bit. All we have to do is go over to our layer, make sure we're selected on it, go up to here on our layers panel, and we have an array of different choices. You guys can play around with these different ones, but in this specific scenario, we're going to want to select color dodge. And this will pretty much delete the black background. Obviously, we still have some sharp corners right here. To get kind of this sharp edge to go away, or at least to help it out, I'm going to go ahead and rasterize this layer right here, and I'm going to go ahead and erase this just a tad bit. So I'm going to make sure that we're on a pretty faded brush type and lower the opacity down to like 35, I would say. And I'm just going to go ahead and start erasing. The next section that I will be talking about is text, and I'm going to go ahead and go over downloading fonts first. So go over to your browser, and I'll have this link in the description. It's dafont.com. This website has thousands upon thousands of different fonts. We can go ahead and select any of these different categories and find certain fonts that we could go ahead and download. But let's say you want something a little more basic. You could go to sans serif right here, and we got Bibis Noe. This is a very good font, highly recommend it. But if you want something a little more thin, it's really up to you. There are a ton of different choices. Once you find something that you do like, you can click download right here, and it'll go ahead and start downloading a zip folder. So I'm going to go ahead and show in folder, exit out of here, and exit out of our Photoshop real quick. Exit out of that real quick. I'm going to go ahead and drag this over to here real quick, exit out of that, and open this up. And really all you have to do is open up this true type font file. And when you double click, it'll open up this window, and all you have to do is press install, and it installs on your computer. It is as simple as that. Click on this type tool right here, click anywhere on our canvas, and it'll load this in. What we want to do is go ahead and drop down right here and look for our font, this GR Norch, whatever that is. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but I'm going to click on it. I'm going to lower this down to, maybe 200, and I'll just go ahead and start typing. So I'm just going to type in Havoc, and what we can do to edit this, we can go back to our type tool and highlight our text once again, and we'll obviously want to bring it down to maybe 100 to change the color, change the border, all of that. Same thing that we did before, but it's a little different with text, obviously. So we can go to blending options. I'm going to first start out with a stroke. And typically with text, you want a pretty thin stroke. So I'm going to change it to probably 2, maybe even 3, let's say. I'm also going to go ahead and put in a gradient overlay, and I'll change this so that it doesn't look as ridiculous as that. And I'm probably going to go ahead and change it to yellow so it matches this car. I'm also going to add a drop shadow. That's usually a pretty good idea for fonts. I'm going to lower the distance because we want that drop shadow to be as close as we can to the shape. But we can go ahead and spread it a little farther so that it kind of creates an actual outline right here. We can also change the size if we want to, but I typically like to have a pretty distinctive outline for my fonts. Now the last thing I'm going to show you guys is warp. So go to edit, transform, warp, and this is a very handy tool to affect some of even your shapes. You can really use these tools wherever you want to, but I find it to be pretty cool for text. But you can pretty much move these points, wherever these points are, you can move them however you want. So you could perhaps make your text very unique. So I will be uploading more often. This video was a little different just because it's a very long tutorial and I tried to make it a little in depth. Let me know once again what you would like to see in the next video. And with that being said, it's been your boy Havoc here. See you guys in my next tutorial. Peace.